And here we go with Chapter 16 of The Sword in the Stone by T.H. White. The wart got up very early next morning. He had made a determined effort. The moment he woke up, threw off his great bearskin rug under which he slept, plunged his body into the biting air. He dressed furiously, trembling, skipping about to keep warm, and hissing blue breaths to himself as if he were grooming a horse. He broke the ice in a basin and dipped his face in it with a grimace like eating something sour, said, "Ah!" and rubbed his stinging cheeks vigorously with a towel. Then he felt quite warm again and scampered off to the emergency kennels to watch the king's huntsman making his last arrangements. Master William Twitty turned out in daylight to be a shriveled, harassed-looking man with an expression of deep melancholy on his face. All his life he had been forced to pursue various animals for the royal table, and, when he had caught them, to cut them up into the various joints. He was more than half a butcher. He had to know what parts the hounds should eat, and what parts should be given to his various assistants. He had to cut everything up handsomely, leaving 2 vertebrae on the tail to make the chine look attractive. And almost ever since he could remember, he had been either pursuing a hart or cutting it up into joints. He was not particularly fond of doing this. The harts and hinds in their herds, the boars in their singulars, the skulks of foxes, the richness of martens, the bevies of roes, the seats of badgers, and the routs of wolves, all came to him more or less as something which you either skinned or flayed and then took home to cook. You could talk to him about O's and Argos, suet, grease, crottes, fumants, and fiants, but he only looked polite. He knew that you were showing off your knowledge of these words, which were to him a business. You could talk about a mighty boar, which had nearly sloshed you last winter, but he only stared at you with his distant eyes. He had been slashed 16 times by mighty boars, and his legs had white wheels of shiny flesh that stretched right up to his ribs. While you talked, he got on with whatever part of his profession he had in hand. There was only one thing which could move Master William Twitty. Summer or winter, snow or shine, he was running or galloping after boars and harts, and all the time his soul was somewhere else. Mention a hare to Master Twitty, and although he would still go on galloping about the wretched hart, which seemed to be his destiny, he would gallop with one eye over his shoulder, yearning for puss. It was the only thing he ever talked about. He was always being sent to one castle or another all over England, and when he was there, the local servants would feed him and keep his glass filled and ask him about his greatest hunts. He would answer distractedly in monosyllables, but if anybody mentioned a husk of hares, he was all attention, and then he would thump his glass upon the table and discourse upon the marvels of this astonishing beast, declaring that you could never blow a penny for it, because the same hare could at one time be male and another time female, and well he carried grease and crocheted and gnawed, which things no beast on the earth did except it. Wart watched the great man in silence for some time, then went indoors to see if there was any hope of breakfast. He found that there was, for the whole castle was suffering from the same sort of nervous excitement which had got him out of bed so early, and even Merlin had dressed himself in a pair of running shorts to see the fun. Boar hunting was fun. It was nothing like badger digging or covert shooting or fox hunting today. Perhaps the nearest thing to it would be ferreting for rabbits, except that you use dogs instead of ferrets, and a boar that quite easily had a boar that quite easily might kill you instead of a rabbit, and carried a boar spear upon which your life depended instead of a gun. They did not usually hunt the boar on horseback. Perhaps the reason for this was that boar season happened to be in the 2 winter months, when the old English snow would be liable to ball on your horse's hooves, and render galloping too dangerous. The result was that you were yourself on foot, armed only with steel, against an adversary who weighed a good deal more than you did, and who could and who could unseam you from the knave to the chaps, and set your head upon his battlements. There was only one rule in boar hunting. It was, hold on. If the boar charged you, and you had to drop to one knee and present your boar spear in his direction, you held the butt of it with your right hand on the ground to take stock, while you stretched your left arm to its fullest extent and held the spear tightly with it, as high up as possible. You kept the point toward the charging boar. The spear was as sharp as a razor, and it had a cross piece about 18 inches away from the point. This cross piece or horizontal bar prevented the spear from going more than 18 inches into his chest. Without the cross piece, the charging boar would have been capable of rushing right up the spear, even if it did go through him, and getting at you like that. But with the cross piece, he was held away from you at a spear's length, with 18 inches of steel inside him. It was in this situation that you had to hold on. He weighed between 10 and 20 score, and his one object in life was to heave and weave and sidestep until he could get at you and champ you into chops. Well, your one object was not to let go of the spear, clasped tightly under your arm, until somebody had come to finish him off. If only you could keep hold of your end of the spear while the other end was stuck in him, you knew that there was at least a spear's length between you, however much he ran round the forest. You may be able to understand if you think this over. Why all the sportsmen of the castle got up early for the Boxing Day meet and ate their breakfast with a certain amount of suppressed feeling. "Ah!" said Sir Grummore, gnawing a pork chop, which he held in his fingers. "Down in time for breakfast, eh?" "Yes, I am," said the wart. "Fine hunting morning," said Grummore. "Got your spear sharp, eh?" "Yes, I have, thank you," said the wart. He went over to the sideboard to get a chop for himself. "Come on, Pellinore," said Sir Ector. "Have a few of these chickens." "You'll eat nothing this morning," King Pellinore said. "I don't think I will, thank you." "All the same, I don't think I feel quite the thing this morning, what?" Sir Grummore took his nose out of his chop and inquired sharply. "Nerves?" "Oh, no," said King Pellinore. "Oh, no, really, not that. What? I think I must have taken something last night that disagreed with me." "Nonsense, my dear fella," said Sir Ector. "Here, you just have a few chickens to keep your strength up." He helped the unfortunate king to 2 or 3 capons, and the latter sat down miserably at the end of the table, trying to swallow down a few bits of them. "Need them," said Sir Grummore meaningly. "By the end of the day, I dare say." "Do you think so?" asked King Pellinore anxiously. "No, so," said Sir Grummore, and winked at his host. The wart, however, noticed that both Sir Ector and Sir Grummore were eating with rather exaggerated gusto. He did not himself feel that he could manage more than one chop. And as for Kay, he had stayed away from the breakfast room altogether. When breakfast was over and Master Twitey had been consulted, the Boxing Day cavalcade moved off to the meet. Perhaps the hounds would have seemed rather a mixed pack to a master of hounds today. There were half a dozen black and white Allants, which looked like greyhounds with the heads of bull terriers or worse. These, which were the proper hounds for boars, wore muzzles on account of their ferocity. The Gaze hounds, of which there were 2 taken just in case, were in reality nothing but greyhounds according to modern language, while the Limers were a sort of mixture between the bloodhound and the red setter of today. The latter had collars on, and were led with straps. The Brachs were just like beagles, and trotted along with the master in the way that beagles have always trotted, and a charming way it is. With the hounds went the foot people. Merlin in his running shorts looked rather like Lord Braden Powell, only of course the latter has not got a beard. Sir Ector was dressed in sensible leather clothes. It was not considered sporting to hunt in armor, and he walked beside Master Twitey with that bothered and important expression which had always been worn by masters of hounds. Sir Grummore, just behind, was puffing rather and asking everybody whether they had sharpened their spears. King Pellinore had dropped back right among the villagers, feeling that there was safety in numbers. And all the villagers were there, every male soul on the estate, from Hob the Ossinger down to old Wat with no nose, all carrying spears or pitchforks or old scythe blades or stout poles. Some, even of the young women who were courting, had come out, with baskets of provisions for their men. It was a regular Boxing Day meet. At the edge of the forest, the last follower joined up. He was a tall and distinguished-looking person dressed in green, and he carried a 7-foot bow. "Good morning, master," he said pleasantly to Sir Ector. "Oh, yes," said Sir Ector. Yes, good morning. Yes, good morning." Then he led the gentleman in green aside and said in a loud whisper that could be heard by everybody, "For heaven's sake, my dear fellow, do be careful. This is the king's own huntsman, and those two other chaps are King Pellinore and Sir Grummore. Now do be a good chap, my dear fellow, and don't say anything controversial, will you, old boy? There's a good chap." "Certainly I won't," said the green man reassuringly. "But I think you had better introduce me to them." Sir Ector blushed deeply and called out, "Ah, Grummore! Come over here a minute, will you? I want to introduce you to a friend of mine, a chap called Wood, old chap, Wood with a W, do you know, not an H? Yes, and this is King Pellinore, Master Wood, King Pellinore." "Hail," said King Pellinore, who had not quite got out of the habit when nervous. "How do you do?" said Sir Grummore. "No relation to Robin Hood, I suppose?" "Oh, not in the least," interrupted Sir Ector hastily. "WOOD, you know, like the stuff they make furniture out of. Furniture, you know, and spears, and, well, spears, you know, and furniture." "How do you do?" said Robin. "Hail," said King Pellinore. "Well," said Sir Grummore, "it's funny you should both wear green." "Yes, it is funny, isn't it?" said Sir Ector anxiously. "He wears it in mourning for an aunt of his who died of falling out of a tree." "Beg your pardon, I'm sure," said Sir Grummore, grieved at having touched upon the tender subject, and all was well. "Now then, Mr. Wood," said Sir Ector, when he had recovered himself, "shall we go for our first draw?" As soon as this question had been put, Master Twitty was fetched into the conversation, and a brief constabulation followed, in which all sorts of technical terms like lesses were bandied about. Then there was a long walk in the wintry forest, and the fun began. Wart lost his rather panicky feeling, which had taken hold of his stomach when he was breaking his fast. The exercise and the snow wind had breathed him so that his eyes sparkled almost as brilliantly as the frost crystals in the white winter sunlight, and his blood raced with the excitement of the chase. He watched the limerer who held the two bloodhound dogs on their leashes, and saw the dogs straining more and more as the boar's lair was approached. He saw how one by one, and ending with the gaze hounds, who did not hunt by scent, the various hounds became uneasy and began to whimper with desire. He noticed Robin pause and pick up some lesses, which he handed to Master Twitty, and then the whole cavalcade came to a halt. They had reached the dangerous spot. And we will pause there.